Hello to everyone at TADSummit 2015. Hope you're having an amazing conference. I wanted to spend just a few minutes with you today talking about telecom app development, my experience with the ecosystem in general, and then also my experience with TADHack events in more specifics. So a little bit about me. I'm the former CTO at a US-based telecom called Bandwidth. I've also run a startup incubator inside of Bandwidth called Bandwidth Labs. I'm currently the fractional CTO and advisor to a number of startups in the Raleigh-Durham area here in North Carolina, and an advisor to private equity and venture capital firms, and a two-time TADHack winner. My first competition in TADHack was this past April in London. My good friend and I, Anders Brownworth, built the Matrix bot. And the idea behind the Matrix bot was, could we, from a Raspberry Pi sitting on this device that you see in front of you, stream video back to the browser and provide the user with the ability to control the direction of the robot from their browser session. So we built a very simple user interface that displayed video from the device and then gave them rudimentary navigation buttons that allowed them to control the device going right or left, backwards and forwards, and so on. Everything that we used in this project was all open source. In Lisbon, where you're sitting right now, in June, I built my second TADHack application, and it was an application called TADSlack. At the time, Slack was really beginning to ramp in terms of user count, but one of the things that I felt like was missing was the ability to make voice calls from within the Slack interface, record the audio, and then potentially search the audio of those calls without ever leaving the Slack interface. So I pieced together a stack that used the Telestack's telecom infrastructure, the Telestack's RESTCOM visual designer, a product called Clarify.io to index all of the media, and once again, a Node.js backend. With the exception of Clarify, everything in my stack, again, was an open source solution. Both of these projects won awards at the TADHacks where I participated. So how did I come up with these ideas, or how do I look for new ideas? One of the things that I tend to look for is that communication is almost always a part of something else. So where can I go find where there's a bunch of users using an application, but where they don't have great comm interfaces? So maybe they don't have texting or they don't have voice calling. And that was the case with Slack. I loved using Slack, but the one thing that I always felt like was missing is I couldn't make a phone call. So I tend to go looking for those kinds of things. And what's a yes and opportunity? So it already does the things that it does well, but what can I take and make it that much better and make it more attractive and gather my users from the user community that already exists? So that's one general direction. The second thing I tend to look at are things like the Matrix bot, where you look at it and you say, well, that's not really a communication app at all. But what it demonstrates is the ability for me to send a robot at some point in the future into a building that's contaminated with sensors strapped all over that device. And I can get all of that data in real time fed back to the browser, where the user can then make decisions, drive the robot, get video feeds, and all of those kinds of things. So while it didn't make any sense that I would use the technology the way I did, the idea was that we knew we could solve a real problem using standard open communication protocols. What are the platforms that I tend to use? If telecom is involved, I almost always start with Telestacks. Telestacks is a great open source platform with a really rich and vibrant community of developers. The technology tends to move very quickly, and it's very easy to get help from the community. There's lots of people hanging around on the chat rooms and things like that. So I always found like it was easy to get started with them. Clarify, we've already talked about. It's a fantastic service, and if you're building applications in this space, you need to know about Clarify.io. Really great company. The bandwidth application platform is one I use if I'm doing domestic voice or messaging. And by domestic, I mean domestic US. So bandwidth rates tend to be better than most of the competition. And also I have a connection into the company. So it gives me a little bit of an incentive to use their stack over someone else's. Matrix, I mentioned when I was talking about the Matrix bot. It's a great comm and switching and messaging platform. Fantastic, high speed, and again, an open source platform that's got a great community around it. Twilio I tend to use only when I need international calling or international messaging. They're fantastic. Their coverage is very good, and that's where I tend to use them. And then for all of the development I use Node.js just because that's what I'm used to working in. It's what I've been working in for the last few years. So what's next? There are three things I'm paying attention to. SMS is the new command line interface, which you see in things like Thomas Howe's Just Kiss Me app. How can we use the phone as a way to control other devices that are on the network somewhere without an app? It feels to me like SMS is getting ready to get really interesting again as this new CLI and bot control kind of interface. The second area that's really interesting to me is podcasting. You might say, well, what does podcasting have to do with communications? The answer is maybe not much right now, but the podcasting world is exploding. Everybody's jumping in. And the tools are still relics of the 2005 era when podcasting first got started. So it feels to me like there's an interesting dynamic getting ready to happen in that space where podcasting recordings will have the ability to be more interactive, potentially have audio messages dropped into the middle of them, much like blog comments do now. So will I be able to do voice comments alongside a podcast that perhaps anybody can listen to? Those kind of things seem really interesting to me. And the third, and much more high level, is that there's a revolution coming in automation and artificial intelligence. It's already well on its way. And I think the ramifications for telecom application developers is that what we're going to participate in is a radical shift toward enabling users to do more of the quote development work. And we're already seeing that with things like with the Telestacks RESTCOM Visual Designer and things like that, where we're putting more and more tools into the hands of end users that is really a coding interface. So that feels like a space where we all need to pay attention and figure out, as developers, how do I move up the stack even further and tackle more and more complex problems and let machines do more of the rote tasks that we're used to. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. It was just a quick run through of my experience as a TAD developer. If you want to reach out to me and talk about any of these topics, I'm happy to do so. You can reach me at any of these spots. I blog at scottbarstow.com. I'm on every social network at Scott Barstow. Any of the code from any of my TADHack projects and most everything else I work on is available on my GitHub account. And then last is I podcast over at 353rd, which is available on iTunes or at Stitcher. Thanks for listening and have a great rest of the conference.